So maybe one thing we can talk about while you're both here is, just what it's like to be an Ember engineer at LinkedIn. Because I think a lot, we're familiar with a lot of teams. We worked on teams that are kind of smaller. I think that's like a common size team in Ember land is like, a team of Ember engineers at a bigger company or like a small consultancy. And in those dynamics, it's kind of different, right? It's like you can do experimental code and experimental add-ons, and some of the problems that an organization like LinkedIn has probably don't come up in those smaller dynamics where you're working on one app for 6 months or a year, and you all have. I'm sure there's a lot of Ember code at LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And
it reminds me of there's some book about like systems thinking that had an anecdote about how when they were building the first the Saturn V rocket or something, they built like the biggest hangar that anyone had ever built. And when you're building a structure that size, they hadn't taken into account that inside that structure it's going to have its own weather, right? So now you actually have when you have big enough systems, there's these emergent effects that you couldn't plan for because anything smaller that you've worked on just doesn't have the characteristics to produce them. And I feel like when you're at LinkedIn scale, where you're building this quite large social network, there are problems that you didn't even consider, and you don't see those until you start having engineering teams all working on the same code base, and they're all in different teams working on different products, and they're distributed all around the world.
Right.
You're probably familiar with more of the
the
tornadoes, the code tornadoes than I am.
I think for the main, so we have a bunch of projects, right? There's a bunch of apps. The main.com site is large. We have very large teams, separate but focused on their product, their feature teams, and the things that come up are things that so I did consulting for a long time beforehand. Mm-hmm. Most of the consulting gigs I had just didn't have these problems. You didn't care. From
if the if helper creates a new view instance,
it didn't care, right?
Right.
But other things the degree to which you have to care a lot about internationalization or something, right? It is really easy to become US focused and just only care about English and you don't show anything else, right? How many startups have no non-English page, right? Yeah, it's really it's a really common thing, and then you realize we internationalize in more than 20 languages, right? It's like a super including which was I accidentally got my login stuck on Arabic for a long time.
Did you really?
Yeah, for multiple weeks, and I had to schedule an appointment or a meeting with the person in charge of the translation team to help me figure out how to turn it off.
Wait, what's your Arabic name?
I don't know. I don't read Arabic.
I'm actually glad. It's hard because when you're looking at left to right, even if it's let's say German, you can easily see layout bugs.
Yes.
But your brain isn't wired in right to left, which is why I'm glad Zara, my wife, can read and write in Farsi and Arabic script. So sometimes I'm just can you look at this and just
that's nice.
tell me if it looks right or not?
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then you get other languages that just make like in German, it's very common to have really wide words, long words, or combinations of words.
I remember
it totally throws it off. You think it'll be a couple hundred pixels or something like that, and now boom, it wraps funny. I was what is
I
happening?
remember doing the design for an error page when I was at Apple, and it was the error message in German was 4 lines, but then in Japanese it was literally 4 characters, something like that. And I'm and they're can you center this and do that? I know, and this is pre-Flexbox and everything. I'm this is a disaster. No, I don't know.
Yeah. My question was going to be given some of these kind of structural issues or systemic issues that only show themselves at scale, at a LinkedIn size scale, are the Ember apps still conventional enough that, if you were to hire someone new who was had my background, would I be feel I'm not even writing an Ember app anymore, or is it actually more or less kind of feels like an Ember app?
Now, this is actually what I love about the conventions and why I'm so happy that we use a very opinionated framework, because when I was doing consulting, I would drop into these shops, and if it was an Ember app, within an hour, I could be up and running because you have some sort of automation. But then you go into this other thing where it's a hand-rolled framework, right, where everything's just a little bit different, and it's like you're in your house in a dream and everything's just moved around and you reach for something, it's not there.
Yeah. They just dip your toe on the coffee table.
Yeah, that happens in real life. But wait, what's the analogy here? What are you stubbing your toe on?
The coffee table.
Okay. It's actually like you would recognize it as a stock Ember app that does the build through Ember CLI, does the serve through Ember CLI. There is some LinkedIn specific stuff for how we deploy because we have global infrastructure, we have points of presence all over the world. So you do have to do a little extra enterprise scale stuff.
And I think I would say by count of total Ember developer, most probably haven't worked commonly in an app that uses engines heavily, for example. Right. There's still probably a fair amount of people that don't do server-side rendering as a priority. All of those things like that's part of our app.
So where are the boundaries where it kind of breaks, where it's like it needs, deploys is obviously a boundary where you could see like your application template probably looks like most application templates, but then when it comes to deploying, it's going to be unique because of LinkedIn scale. Yeah. Maybe testing is another one. So maybe talk about some of those.
I think the first thing to realize about the code, the main app's code base is that there's many engines and they're all in the main LinkedIn.com app. They're all in repo engines. So all of the engine code and the tests for them live in the same repo. Until very recently, Ember CLI, even kind of still, but Ember CLI basically doesn't support having tests in an in-repo add-on engine anything that run or that are handle that in any intelligent way, right? It does nothing. Like having a test subfolder in an in-repo something has no effect. So like one of the things that we did was like, that sucks. We don't want to have to put all of our tests in a single special place in the host app or something, right?
Right.
We want to be able to co-locate the tests with the engine, right? That's the whole point of the engine is that we can have the feature teams that are working on those features can live in this one subdirectory and they own that stuff. So that's the kind of thing we worked on. And right now, I think we're actively working on moving the tests in to be co-located, and there's an add-on that we use that one of our engineers put together that works with Ember CLI's ability to specify the test tree to build up the test tree and pull it out of the in-repo add-ons. So that works well. We still plan to make like an actual RFC to Ember CLI to make it like the default out-of-the-box experience for add-ons. But the real thing is that this is the one case in Ember CLI, like digging into the weeds here, in Ember CLI land where there's actually a difference between in-repo and external add-ons. So most people don't realize this, but there is, from Ember CLI's perspective, there's no actual difference between an in-repo add-on or an external add-on. The only difference is how we discover that it exists. So normally we walk the package JSON of the host and then see the dependencies and then go, that's how we discover add-ons. The only difference is that in an in-repo case, you have an array in your package JSON that says, these are additional search paths, basically. That's it. Everything else, all of the other add-on code is exactly the same. There's not like conditionals if is in repo or something, right?
That's pretty cool.
So the whole infrastructure is set up that way.
And then engines are just add-ons as well, right?
Engines are like a specialization of add-ons. And I think conceptually engines have a purpose that, so my opinion isn't well appreciated, but by some.
We're here to validate you.
So I think people reach for engines today for a couple of reasons. The biggest one that I hear from folks is specifically because to get some segment of their app loaded lazily.
Okay, it explains.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is not a good reason to choose engines, right? So lazy loading is a byproduct of an engine, not a feature.
Can you talk about what led to the creation of engines at a high level so that folks could understand when they are kind of useful? Like, what is their ideal use case? Because I personally also have never reached for an engine.
I think the primary use case is for things like where you actually want isolation, right? Like imagine you're building a thing, like a series of widgets or a group of components that work together, and they're standalone. They're on their own. They do their own thing, but there's a bunch of them, right? And you want to distribute them independently. Maybe they're a separate package or product. Maybe you bring them in and you share them across your organization amongst many apps, something like that, right? In that case, if you wanted to be able to bundle them together, not from a code splitting or like a separate assets perspective, but just like, hey, this thing as a group is one API. You can't individually invoke these components, but you can mount this whole thing in this, hey, boom, here's a spot for it.
Can we give an example? An example maybe like a comments, like a Discord, the comment system that's on the current Ember blog, right? Where you might just load it here in the spot from the outside. It has no knowledge other than, hey, I invoke this thing and I pass it whatever arbitrary parameters it gets, and it does this thing. And it's a black box, right? That's what an engine is great for. Same with routing. For example, if you had a website and you wanted to have a blog on your website, an Ember site, you could totally imagine having the blog has nothing to do with the rest of the site. It could just be an engine, and you mount it at a given location in your router map, and you can navigate to it. But there's no communication really between the host and the actual engine.
In terms of motivation, I think what motivated the work on the feature was that we noticed. So Ember is super, super popular in a specific segment, which is the big app. You have a big company with hundreds of front-end developers, and they're all building this one single-page app experience, right? You can probably think of in the top of your head 5 different big publicly traded companies that all have one big single-page app. And there's even a longer tail of smaller companies but they're still quite big, medium-sized companies. And what we noticed is that if you look at all these apps, there's a very common pattern, which is they'll have some navigation bar along the top, and then you click on those things and they're completely different features. And it turns out that most of those features or that subset of the product is all owned by one team. And people were getting really frustrated because everything was just being dumped into one app, one repo. And so I'm on my team, I'm working away, and then I can introduce a change that inadvertently breaks your app, but I don't really notice it because I don't know anything about it. Yeah, exactly.
You have a shared components folder, shared styles, because you're in a single app code base.
Right. Exactly.
Is this how LinkedIn developers work? Is there day-to-day inside of one engine? Sort of a small product team?
Yeah, so this is true on LinkedIn. So the LinkedIn website is an Ember app, but if you've played with the LinkedIn site, there's a ton of different routes and there's a ton of different products, and we also have some really great tools for salespeople and for recruiters, and all of those are different engines. And so you just take a slice of functionality, and that belongs to a team. I hesitate to use this analogy, but I think it's actually accurate. I think engines serve a similar role as the idea of microservices, where you talk to some people at a startup and they're like, oh, we have 5 engineers and 80 microservices. Right. It's you're doing it wrong. Right. You should probably just have a Rails app. Right. But legitimately, if you're working in a big company, it makes sense for saying, here's a team of 5 people and they own this service, therefore it's its own repo, it deploys separately.
Clear cut boundaries.
Exactly. Right. Formalizing organizational boundaries in the code.
That's great. What is the guidelines around when to make something, split one app into 2 engines, or to split one app into 2 apps? Or another way to put that is, why not, if you have 5 kind of feature product teams working in repo engines, why not just 5 different apps?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think firstly, when you look at a thing, you have a feel, you can generally tell this is a conceptual app and this works together, or this is totally unrelated things, and I'm only maybe making an app just because it's easier to deploy one thing instead of 5 things, right? So that's one thing, right? Sometimes it's super obvious that, hey, one of these isn't like the other, right? You group the things together and either nothing is alike or a couple of them go together but other parts don't, that kind of thing.
Right.
In those cases, reaching for engines seems good. I think another use case, the ability to have ownership of a subset of the code base is really important. I think you can do that today. We do that with engines. You can also do that with the proposed file system format redesign, the modularification is commonly called. And I think those are both good ways to do it. Now, I think conversely, I think it's easier to say when you shouldn't use engines, and you shouldn't use engines when you conceptually manage a single app. You have one thing that you manage. You have you have one Ember data store and one set of models and one, everything is talking the same thing. And you're just trying to make it's a big app, so you want to load it lazily. That is not when you should use engines. But unfortunately, there's no current way, sorry, Tom. There's no current way to work around that problem without engines. So I totally understand why people reach for that.
Around the problem of
code splitting.
code splitting.
I was going to say there is a performance benefit to engines, which is that even if things are quite unrelated, modeling it as two engines has benefits in the sense that they're still sharing the core Ember framework.
Yeah.
And you're not doing a full page transition where
between pages. Yeah,
I see.
Yes.
So if you had two separate apps that were linked in the header, you would have the full page.
Right, you basically throw everything out memory and you have to like
Yes.
reevaluate, reboot the Ember app, like a brand new
But
Ember
this
app.
way, maybe you could just pass in current user to every engine, and then you don't have to re-auth.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
What are some of the downsides of engines? Like, when have you seen engines go?
Do you see this scar right here?
So I think the biggest thing that I would say is around the current build pipeline for engines is very painful. It often leads to slower build and rebuild performance than what we want.
You asked what it was like being an Ember developer at LinkedIn. If you're writing build plugins, you get a very visceral sense of the difference between O log n and O n cubed, let's say.
Interesting.
There's so many files that...
So many files.
Yeah, even if your constant time is good, you're still going to be hosed.
Yes, and then I think that's probably the biggest downside. I think is the just build and rebuild time. Now that is not inherent in the system. Like we are currently underway with like sort of revamping, refiguring out, moving where the build work happens to be done at a different layer that would not have these problems. But today, I think the biggest issue is that another really common thing is today we don't have a system for engines or add-ons to essentially pre-bake or pre-build. So right now, when you build an app, no matter how large the app is, you're basically building all of your add-ons or engines together at that time. Whereas you can imagine some of those are large, like Ember is very large. Right. Very large. Damn it, I did it. No, I mean Ember is a significant point to the thing.
Yeah,
there's
Ember is
many
an
files.
optimized, svelte framework for building blazing fast web applications.
Yes, I agree. Sorry.
I'm just here to be the PR guy.
Anyways.
Ember is slow bloated framework, what were you saying?
Having to build all of the add-ons together is a thing that we need to fix, and that's a separate issue. And engines oftentimes make it even harder to solve in the fact that if you do in-repo engines, for example, there's no conceptual publishing step where you could do this pre-bake, right? Like, where do you even do it, right? So I think this is a thing that like I am thinking about. If you sit down at like a normal LinkedIn developer sits down and works in the main .com website app, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be touching more than one or two of the engines at once in one day session, right? Unless you're doing like infra work or like updating packages or something. Like there are cases where you would.
But now you're rebuilding everything.
Yes, every time you rebuild, everything rebuilds, right? And so those are the kinds of things that we're actively working on, and those are where a lot of the pains are.
So would this be like, if I work on Mirage, right? I could just make it so that when you install Mirage, nothing there depends on, most of the source code under add-on should just be almost shipped as like a dist.
Yes.
And right now...
That's the idea. The problem with that is that a very important feature landed in EmberCLI, which allows the host app to determine the targets.
Yeah.
So if you pre-build, you have to pre-build for a variety of possible targets. Like, pick them up. Like, you can imagine there's probably only 2 or 3 really common ones, like evergreen browsers, which is like latest 2 of Edge, Chrome, Safari, whatever.
Right.
And then like IE11 and like those are probably the 2 biggest combinations. But yeah, that's the idea.
That's the idea.
The idea is that you would pre-build it. Now, one of the things we're doing as part of the packaging work in EmberCLI, and this is what's going to unblock us for like code splitting and revamping the engine's build pipeline. One of the main features there is that the way all the add-ons present their code is going to be in ES current, like ES like 2018 now, right? And raw templates, and the thing at the end of the pipeline gets to decide what to do about it, right? So the individual things don't have to pre-build necessarily. So that's going to solve a bunch of things, but it makes this problem harder, right? It makes it harder to pre-bake.
Basically, you're kicking the can down the road so that the host has more control.
Yes.
Like, let's say that the add-on ships with like TypeScript files, and now the host app wants.
So I don't know about TypeScript. I think that the common interop should be the latest version of JavaScript, because otherwise, your compiles are going to take forever. Like, what happens if you write your thing using like GWT and I have to download all of Java, right? So I think that's like a little bit, the part that really matters is that if, for example, your add-on wants to use async functions, and I want to use async functions in my app, and I'm saying, you know what, I'm only targeting the latest and greatest mobile browsers, I shouldn't have to ship regenerator compiled code because I don't need it. My browser's not supporting it. So if you're transpiling, now I'm paying a cost that I shouldn't have to.
Yep.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
So I think
but then there's a trade-off with that. Now you
TypeScript and Sass and Less and even templates are all similar examples. Where the thing that I think we want is we want an add-on to provide access to the raw thing, like in the lingua franca. So like in JavaScript, it would be ES latest, right?
Right.
And if you wanted to use in your add-on, wanted to use an optional feature that's not like a stage 2 or 3 feature, like maybe you want to use decorators, for example, you would have to transpile that part. Only that one part, and then provide the rest of the tree. Now, most of that's like essentially amounts to like delayed transpilation. Most of that landed in the most recent version of CLI, the current beta version of CLI, 3.2.
Wow.
And it doesn't inherently have performance benefits, but it unlocks the ability to move forward. We're trying to slowly phase roll out stuff. This is based on a lot of the excellent work that Kelly Sullivan and Alex Navasardian have done in EmberCLI itself over like many months. And like, so we're slowly pushing the boundary of where we can actually get to the point where we're doing what amounts to like real quote unquote code splitting at the app level. Now we're not there yet. That's not shipped.
So this kind of just-in-time compilation or just-in-time transpilation is related to the code splitting?
Yeah, because we need for most of the current technologies that do code splitting, they want to look at ES modules. So they want to follow imports, right? Imports are much easier to follow than things like CGS or AND because they're not dynamic, right? Like they have to be static, right? Well, you have the dynamic import syntax, but it's a separate thing. But for the most part, ES modules are a static thing, and it's easier to, most of the tooling works much better with ES modules.
I see. So I'm a host app, I install a bunch of add-ons, and then from the build's perspective, I'm just looking at a bunch of ES modules that are importing things.
Yes.
I can go to town on that.
Yeah. So then that's essentially what the package hook, which is an RFC that landed in EmberCLI, in the EmberCLI RFC's repo not too long ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago. And that's what we're actively working on implementing. Essentially what it does is, the elevator pitch for the hook, which is quite different than most add-on hooks. But the elevator pitch is it receives all of the data that is needed to create the dist. And then its job is to spit out the in the raw, in the like the
transpile,
like latest
non-final.
Yes, templates should still be HBS files, not precompiled, things like that. I actually also think, and we haven't all talked about this, but we've also set it up to make it so that Sass and Less can be part of that same pipeline. Because you can imagine if your add-on provide like EmberPowerSelects provides. There's some styling that goes with that. So like they currently, in that add-on, they currently detect, does the host app use Sass? If it does, then do this thing and let them import the mix in when they want. And that way they can configure like the variables of the whatever. I don't know all the things that are customizable, but like whatever, the colors or something.
Right.
So that to me should be possible, right?
You're working with the raw materials instead of like overriding selectors. Like just like you have the modules available, you also have these other things in their raw form.
To me, the most exciting thing about this feature is that there's this like one little paper cut in Ember that just always gets everyone who's new to the framework and is so annoying even if you're an experienced developer, which is I should be able to just install a package from NPM and import it in my app, right? And it's just like the fact. And you can start doing that with like Ember Browserify, which is a really great solution. It's a really great solution. But like I'm going to be so happy when we get the stuff landed, and you'll be able to just pick an off-the-shelf packager like Rollup or Webpack or whatever you want to use, and import a file from import a package from npm and it just works. Like it's going to be such a
magical.
It's going to feel.
I mean, there's a proliferation of like what amounts to like shim add-ons, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Some of them, honestly, do legitimately provide additional value. Like some nice helpers, some nice components. But others are like just trying to provide the build time support for importing things.
Yeah.
But even more than that is the fact that we'll be able to leverage the things that Babel, for example, does out of the box, which around polyfilling and globals, right? Like it would be super nice if my targets only had maybe Edge, didn't include I11, that just anything that I use from a polyfill standpoint that's not supported in latest Chrome, Edge, Firefox, whatever, it only imports those parts of the Babel polyfill instead of literally everything. Right? So today, if you opt into the polyfill, you're getting the entire polyfill, regardless of whether your code actually needs a native promise or if your code needs whatever feature, right? Like intersection observer or something, if that's even in the polyfill. I don't know, whatever. Point is, you get the whole thing, and that's pretty annoying. And Babel precedent, which is what we leverage already and have for a while, what we use to do the transpilation, it already has the ability to like see, I see you use global promise without an import. Let me replace that with an import from promise, like import promise from core.js.
Oh,
right?
cool.
So that it totally supports that. But the problem is, if we did that, we have no way to drop out the parts of the polyfill that you didn't import, because we don't have tree shaking.
Right.
So it all kind of goes part and parcel.
I see.
It's all like a big ball of spaghetti.
Can I just say, like, this kind of stuff, this area of Ember, like, it just makes me very glad to be using Ember. There's so much engineering work that goes here, and like, I think a lot of this comes from the problems at scale that companies like LinkedIn have. And I think it's also like that kind of underappreciated. When it works, you don't know it. You know, I'm just used to kind of using my add-ons.
Yeah.
I install them. They do amazing things out of the box. I literally never think about it. So thanks for working on this, because this stuff is, I know it's hard, and I know there's just all these knife cuts, and this is like one of the best things about being an Ember developer. So appreciate all your work.
I'm sorry.
Well, it's funny because like on the one hand, it does feel like it takes too much time. Because a lot of this stuff, like talking about code splitting, this is something that like a year and a half ago, basically everyone was able, if you're doing a greenfield app, it's something that you kind of take for granted now. And I think that does feel bad in the short term, because you kind of feel like, oh, we're missing out, we're falling behind, we're like losing out. But then I think about all the companies that have made an investment in Ember. Like I think about LinkedIn, right? And this app is now 2.5, 3 years old, something like that. It started being written before all of this infrastructure existed, and now there is so much Ember at LinkedIn. There's no way that we could rewrite everything in a reasonable time frame, right? It would take years to rewrite everything. So you think about, as a business, you're going to make this investment in Ember, and you can have that feeling of stability, right? That like we're not going to get the latest and greatest flashy features right away, but at the end of the day, you have the Robert Jacksons of the world toiling away to do all that engineering effort for you.
Right.
So you just, you're just pointed at the true north. You just like keep chugging away, and you
flip a version in package.json, and then all of a sudden you get all this stuff. I mean, you get warnings at compile time that tell you about all these. I mean, this is the thing. Like, if you live in the Twitter sphere and you're kind of in the conference circuit and you're talking with all these people, like, oh, I've had tree shaking or code splitting for 6 months, but I think by and large, like the majority of people are not, the people working on an app at a company are thinking about that, their business problems mostly.
Yes.
Like the tech stuff is super distracting. Like the amount of changes, I mean, and again, it's funny even thinking like this from Ember's perspective versus another JavaScript framework, but like in the grand scheme of things, Ember is still like, if there's a 6-month difference, everyone else is still learning things from the last 5 or 10 years.
Right,
And so to think that you can be on a technology for years long and be able to take advantage of a new thing within 6 months or a year, even like, I think both of us, our personalities, the apps we work on, like, upgrading to the latest version as soon as it comes out. Like, we just don't even think about that. Like, we'll be, several versions behind on Ember because we're just working on new business problems or whatever. I know there are developers who are like, the new Ember version came out, I'm right on the latest thing.
Well,
but for us, it's like when we upgrade every couple months, let's say like 3 or 4 times a year, and it's super easy and stable, and you just get all this new stuff. It's like, it's incredible.
I'm just really proud of the community that we've built because our community really values building software that benefits the end users and benefits, if you're a business, if it benefits your business, putting money in your bank account, those are important things. And I really appreciate the fact that we value those are our priorities, and the technology is just a means to that end. And that means that we can't afford to go off on these wild goose chases. We want to make sure that we do the right thing and we do it in a way that we can bring the whole community with us because we're not building disposable software.
Right. Well, and the flip side of that is that we can take advantage of the other JavaScript frameworks and other JavaScript people in the JavaScript community doing R&D for us and figuring out like what works, what doesn't work, like what's good. There's been so much iteration, even in just the tree shaking code splitting space, and just all the capabilities that are being worked on. And I think it's great, and I'm super happy and I'm thankful to all the folks pushing the boundaries of the tech in the abstract.
But I will say, it does feel pretty darn good to be so far ahead of the industry with Glimmer VM. Like that feels good because Ember always was ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And I think there was a period of time where we were kind of like figuring out how to, in a lot of ways, deal with Ember's success, which is we built this whole ecosystem and we had people who bought into that and they built these apps and now we're like, okay, well now we need to change some stuff. Like how do we actually figure out how to balance progress with stability?
That's what I was going to say. I think Ember does a really good job at getting that trade-off because it's not business value versus new tech. Like there's a middle ground in Ember. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like Ember so much.
I think it took a while to figure it out. I think especially like, let's say like 2 years ago, I think we were kind of in the middle of this zone where it just felt like a constant slog. And I think we had to learn as a core team, how do we take these big changes that we want to get done and how do we break them into small incremental steps that we can actually get done with open source contributions where people don't have like a year or two to go off and build infrastructure.
Yep. And we just don't have the time. Like you need to be able to spread the work out across the folks. I think that for a while it was really hard to even explain the concepts well enough to even let the community help, right? And I think we've really tried pretty hard in the last year or 2 years to like request issues and trying to be more open about the initiatives that we're doing and not like being sort of a black box as a like leadership team. And I think that pays off, right? Like when we open up request issues, I have a checklist of these things and we try to lead in and explain what to do. Most of those get done by the community and they're like super eager to jump in and help.
Kind of while we're just talking to everyone and we have you here, like, we know you do a ton of work on a daily basis on tons of different repos and, from issue triage to fixing bugs. Can you kind of like help us step into your shoes and talk through kind of what's the most helpful thing that someone can do? Like when you see this thing versus this thing, like which one's more helpful in terms of just helping, move the Ember project forward for folks who are looking to kind of get involved? I
think from an issue perspective, well, certainly PRs are great. But from an issue perspective, even if it's not your issue, but it's an issue you saw, or you happen to follow the repo and you saw someone report a thing and you thought it might affect you or something, making a reproduction, even if it's like literally Ember new and then show the bug, like that is massively helpful, right?
Upload a repo and
put a repo, Twiddle, however you need to repro it, like. Sometimes Twiddle is totally fine and it's easy to show it in Twiddle. Sometimes you need like a combination, like a weird confluence of events. But those are the things that take us the longest time to figure out as well. Like if you've got this bug, you know what it is almost always. As you try to reduce the bug to the thing, you either identify exactly what's wrong, or you fix the bug, and it's in your code. right? Like stuff like that, right? So I think that's the first thing. Like as you're reporting issues, try really hard to be as detailed as possible. Explain like when I invoke this component this way, and show the templates of it, and then the JS code of the component looks like this, and like whatever, and then hopefully provide a reproduction. That's like the first. Like if there is an issue and I see there's a reproduction, I am going to clone the thing and I'm going to look at it.
Well, even if it's not your issue, I've noticed that one super helpful thing that people who want to get started contributing, but they don't know where to start, is you don't need any official capacity. Like you don't need to be a member of any team. You don't need you don't need to be sanctioned or blessed in any way. If someone posts an issue in a repo, go in there and try to reproduce it and say either, yes, I was able to reproduce this, or no, I wasn't able to reproduce it, or this is a dupe of this other bug, right? Like you don't need the authority to do any of those things, and it's so helpful.
It's massive.
It's so helpful. I've seen a lot of people get started that way.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think so that's the issue angle, right? Oftentimes reducing it to a repro and then posting the issue, like the thing that I personally try to do, and I know a lot of us do when we do the triage, is like give advice on like where to look, how to fix it, what to do, right? Like we spend a lot of time trying to help folks contribute the fixes. Like while it may or may not be easier for one of us to just fix it, it certainly doesn't teach anyone else anything, and it doesn't help us get more people that can do it over time, right? So I think that's another thing we try to do. You can jump into the Slack. There's a Dev Ember channel in the community Slack. There's the forums. There's all sorts of ways to get involved. And poke at things.
When you say PRs are very helpful,
I was being somewhat tongue in cheek, right? It is much. For example, it is much easier to send pull requests to Ember CLI than it is to send pull requests to Ember for most people. Like you would just see more one-off contributors to Ember CLI because people are more familiar with their node space and they understand what's going on. It's easier to debug it, and we use a substandard test framework and stuff like that, right? Sorry, Joe Wise. So I think that's all. That's one thing. Ember's internals feel harder, right? Like they aren't necessarily harder. A lot of stuff is the same, right? But there's concerns that you don't have to think about. Thankfully, I don't want to think about them either.
You're saying like the abstractions.
The run as a concept is not trivial to understand.
Even like Glimmer VM and like Handlebars is a programming language. Glimmer VM is a programming language VM. So
exactly.
It's deep stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I think sending a PR. So issues are very much appreciated, especially if you can be detailed and explain what it is. I said send a PR because obviously if you can fix it, right? And I think the thing I would like to make true is that all of the issues feel approachable to people and that they can try to pick it up and work on it. That's not always true. Sometimes you need super in the weeds knowledge of history about why a thing is like this to even know what's going on.
Well, the thing that's really hard is if someone has an issue and then they submit a PR that fixes their issue, but they fix it in a bad way.
Yes.
But then the explanation of the correct way is so complicated that you're you can't it's going to take you 2 hours to explain it, right?
Yes.
So you're I'll get around to it, and then people start getting angry. What's the problem? I tried this patch and it fixed my problem. It's
well, and the canonical example there is you add a guard. It throws an error when you call this method is undefined. So I'll just check if it's undefined before I call the method. Well,
technically, fixes the bug.
Hey, it fixes your bug, but doesn't actually fix the programming problem, right? It's probably something else downstream or a bug in your original code, like your app code or something like that.
And at that point, just jumping into Slack, maybe.
Exactly.
Reaching out to y'all, or
I think that's the best. I think starting with an issue is great. Search first, I guess, but. Starting with an issue, jumping in, and then pinging the Slack channel, talk to people. There's a bunch of folks. It's not just me. There's a bunch of folks in there trying to help people. If it's something that's not ephemeral, hey, let's look at this thing together. You can point me how to fix it or how to repro a thing. Post it on the forum, discuss, and it's great. I've been trying to do recently when people post well-reasoned questions in the forums. I've been trying to do what I call code, in the discuss forum, discuss.emberjs.com. I've been trying to go to do little code safaris and walk through the code. What happens when you do when you set a property and how does it schedule a re-render, right? Okay, well, as you see, this.set calls this thing, and I try to link all the places. And it's like really helpful, like see the walkthrough. I know when I started, when I first started with Ember, the very first things I did was all documentation related. And I didn't know anything. I knew Ruby at the time. So I was like doing build system stuff, because at the time the build system was all Ruby. But the things that was so helpful to me figuring out how things worked was seeing these explanations, or looking at some of the commit messages that Tommy and Huda were writing, or Peter at the time, like where they're like writing books. And I used to make fun of them mercilessly about this. And now I'm doing the same thing, right? Like explaining, like it's a one-line change and you spent like 30 minutes on a commit message.
Or taking a 3-day course.
Yes, that happens.
That's how we met.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, we met in class. He was in the front row.
3-day course.
I batted my eyelashes out.
I was the instructor.
Oh, so you were up front.
My best student.
Yeah. I went to a class that was in Chicago at
That's right.
DevMind, I think. Yeah. So it was great.
Nice. You and Yehuda.
For my first time staying in a hostel, it was.
Really?
Yeah, I was really worried about that. I know I'm such a country bumpkin. So.
No, I've never stayed in a hostel.
Yeah, it's a little hostel.
They don't have 5-star hostels, do they?
It was really nice, actually. It was really nice.
Really?
But you had your own room.
Yeah, I had my own room. It's a little more, but it was still really way less expensive.
Of a hostel.
It was way less expensive.
I think like 6 people in the room this big.
No, it was. I had my own room. And it had like a little table. It was small. It was like Manhattan apartment. You know, Tom.
Yeah, I know.
You're familiar.
Yeah.
But it was great. It was great. They had a big open space. They had like kegs and stuff. It was good.
Wow.
I mean, I lucked out.
Sounds good.
I was very worried about that. I was so worried.
Yeah.
I was prepared to pull the trigger on a hotel, but it was like so much money, and I was paying it for it myself.
I think the average hostel was probably a lot worse. Probably more what you
No, it worked out. I'm just saying I lucked out.
You
You can save so much money now that we know that for all your business travel, we can put you in hospital.
I don't know, Tom. I don't know. Well, rewind. Let's strike that.
Well, we have some questions folks have asked, and just I guess one last question I have before we get into this. Just like, what's the coolest thing that LinkedIn does in terms of kind of infrastructure? Like, what would just be cool for an outsider? Like, how do you do testing? How you do deploys? Is there any automated setup scripts that help engineers get going? Is there just something kind of unique or special way you all do things?
I'm trying to figure out how much I can say.
Sounds good.
I mean, nobody's listening. Don't worry.
Sounds juicy.
Nobody's listening.
They're listening. No, definitely Anne from corporate communications.
Aha!
Hi, Anne. I know I told you this is only about Ember.
Can you talk about Acme Co. and what they might do if they were an innovative tech company?
We do some really cool stuff. I think our analytics stuff is pretty cool. I'm trying to remember what blog posts are on the company blog that we can talk about.
Yeah. I think the thing that I quite enjoy is like this data driven, measurement and tracking over time, that kind of stuff. I don't know that that's necessarily different than what other people try to do, but we just happen to do it well.
Right.
So
you collect a lot of data on users and are able to analyze.
Not data on users, no.
Right.
Like performance data. Yes. Don't get me in trouble.
I'm not putting words in your mouth. Performance data. What do you mean? Like
how long does it take to like initial render? Like what's the time till the first render is done, and tracking it over time, and actually looking at that across the entire spectrum of the user base, in like comparing it versus countries and device profiles, and like that changes dramatically based on your internet, obviously, right? Like if you're if you're on a mobile device and has either lower CPU or it has a great CPU and lower memory, or it has great everything and you have crappy internet, right? Like all of those things are factors, and that's a thing that I don't know. That's the thing I really enjoy.
Yeah, there's a ton of performance timing APIs in the browser, and you'd be surprised that a lot of companies at LinkedIn scale only care about like the homepage. Like they really only look at the performance of like the feed or what you land on. But we get a weekly email of performance data for like basically every site, like every page on the site, and like how much has it gone up, how much has it gone down, and like Robert was saying,
traffic numbers.
And it's not like very sophisticated. Like let's look at 90th percentile, let's look at 50th percentile, let's look at like 95th percentile, and you can go in and do some really sophisticated like slicing and dicing. And we also have a pretty cool system for doing experimentation, and it's very pervasive in the culture of LinkedIn of not to just take things on faith because some guy wearing a black turtleneck and New Balance sneakers is like, oh, this is like this is going to change the world.
A blue blazer and
how dare you, sir? How dare you? But instead it's like, okay, we have a hypothesis. Let's test it out, and it's surprisingly like easy to say, well, let's ramp this to like 5% of our members. See if it improves performance. See if it hurts performance.
Yeah, if it raises, if it raises, whether it's revenue, like if it's about ads, or whether it's like people interact with the page more, or they're more likely to go on to another.
So you probably saw the blog post we did recently about where we rewrote the LinkedIn feed, one version with Glimmer, one version with Preact, and the only reason we were able to do that test is because we had so much great infrastructure for one, being able to say, well, let's find these customers in the US and let's send some percentage to the Preact version. Let's slice off this other cohort and send them to the Glimmer version. And then also let's collect like really, really detailed performance information so we can compare the performance characteristics of Preact and Glimmer, not just in the aggregate, but well, maybe one is faster on slower mobile devices, but the other one's faster on like a Mac desktop.
And that's why you were able to split it up, because you had like 6 metrics for each version or whatever in that post.
Yeah. So we had like first meaningful paint.
Right.
We had time to interactive. We had a server-side rendered version and a client-side rendered version.
And so all the infrastructure was already set up for that.
We didn't have to do any
additional
cool work. Yeah.
That's very cool. Nice. Well, why don't we get into the questions? I think we asked on. Did we ask on?
When did they ask these?
On the Discuss forum or
yesterday on Slack.
On Slack. Cool.
So here's one. Jamie White asked about your thoughts on Vue, sort of why it's gotten so popular.
No, Vues are dead. We killed Vues. They were deprecated in Ember 1.x.
I think you mean component.js.
We removed Vues in 2.0.
Okay.
Jamie, stop using Vues.
Come on.
VUE.
Oh, I see. That's a Tom question.
I really like Vue. I think Vue is great. Evan Yu, who wrote Vue, lives across the Hudson in New Jersey, and we've hung out a couple of times. He's a really awesome engineer, great guy. I think that the reason that Vue has seen a lot of adoption is because if you look at the tagline, the tagline of Vue is it's about writing incrementally adoptable applications, like right there on the tin, right? So that's what it says on the tin, which is you can start off super easily by just dropping a script tag into your app and start annotating the DOM, and all of a sudden, boom, you have this app that comes to life. And in a lot of ways, I would say that Vue is cannibalizing the market that Angular 1 had staked out. Because Angular 1 had that same super lightweight, incrementally adoptable feel.
If you knew HTML and CSS, you could basically start
drop in the script tag, add your ng:whatever attributes, and these are magic attributes, and the page came alive, right? And I think there's something that feels really great about that, especially for folks who are more comfortable with a server-side rendering framework. So I know I have a friend who was very involved in the PHP community. Mm-hmm. He was telling me, like, dude, in like Laravel, these folks would not touch JavaScript build tools. They don't want it. They want PHP. So for them, it's just like, boom, script tag done.
Yeah.
So
I've seen similar things. We've been using Tailwind, which is like a pretty popular CSS tool, and that's kind of put me in overlap with some of the PHP people, and they all seem to be using Vue.
Yeah. So
Whereas I never saw the overlap with some of the other JavaScript frameworks as much.
So it's interesting. I think that is also potentially an Achilles heel, because I think if you look at what happened with Angular, they had this super easy drop-in experience, but there are pretty serious downsides to that. Like, for example, at LinkedIn, we could not go to production with just dropping a script tag.
Right.
There's performance hits, there's maintenance shortcomings. there's all sorts of stuff. And so you see Angular with Angular 2 being like, oh my gosh, we really need to reboot the world to make this more appropriate for like the enterprise, right? And I think like you see that a lot. You see it so often. You have these libraries where it's like, oh, it's so simple, it's so easy, just drop it in. And then it's like, well, actually, it's like
flash forward 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, now you're popular. Now you're using it big sites, and it turns out all that stuff that you thought Yagni actually. You actually do need.
You're gonna need it.
Yagni. So
use it to past tense.
So anyway, so I think I really like Vue because I think it embodies many of the things, many of the principles and values of Ember about caring about having a complete stack. But from a competitive point of view, I think we're actually sitting pretty well. In Ember, we own the rendering technology. I think Glimmer VM is like pretty far ahead of all the competition. Vue's rendering engine is like, the template language is nice, but it's built on virtual DOM at the end of the day. I would actually love to see Vue adopt Glimmer VM. I think it's not like, I don't think everyone is like planning on doing this, but I don't think it's something that could never happen. And I also think the fact that our community really values building these shared solutions. On the one hand, it does cost us some people who will say, like, I'm never going to use JavaScript build tools. But the folks that we do get we have this shared sense of, okay, we're going to take this seriously and do like some real engineering here.
Yep. Cool.
Next question. What are your thoughts on single file components? Another
Vue innovation.
Do you see these happening in Ember?
Yes, they will happen in Ember soon, probably this year.
You can already do it.
Layout?
Yeah.
I don't know how I'd feel if I opened up an app and all the templates were in layout.
And strings, I think that syntax highlighting.
Well, I think that's a separate issue, right? Like that's
not from my perspective. As a user.
I'm not going to write a syntax highlighter, so good luck. But no, I think seriously, I think that it's multiple levels. I think layout having, for example, having to have a template just for like a one line phrase, like 2 words or something, it sometimes could feel annoying. I can imagine that, right? So being able to use like the handlebar, the HBS back to like tag template string thing, that's fine. You can totally do it, and that's a single file component, right? I know that's not what you mean, but I'm just saying it is a component that is in one file.
So I like the markdown idea that we had.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah,
so I think
we're going to do single file components. It's going to be the Vue style. We'll probably do it as an add-on, but hopefully a lot of people will use it and like it. And if it gets popular enough, maybe we'll consider including it in the built-in. And then I also want to consider.
I think the biggest constraint is like build performance and stuff, right? Like to me, obviously that's my pet issue.
Well, I think that's what I have to do as an add-on. Yeah, you can't regress performance.
If you put it all in single file, then conceptually you're invalidating everything when just a JavaScript.
Oh, right? So now you change
that's
the template.
Just a concern. It's just a thing we need to fix.
You need to redo everything. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's
not insurmountable.
Totally solvable. I'm just saying that's my concern.
But most people building an Ember app have maybe they have 500 components.
Yeah.
And they have an SSD and they have a multi-gigahertz computer. Even if it's inefficient, it'll still be fast enough for them to feel good about it. And then there's LinkedIn scale where we have code tornadoes in our hangar.
I actually want to sneak in a question just on this discussion. Do y'all have any kind of thoughts or advice about how we might, if I wanted to help get the template linting stuff, like the developer experience of working in a Handlebars template? Is there are people working on this?
What do you mean?
So things like autocompletion,
like language server for
Glimmer
templates.
Yeah, Glimmer templates. Yes,
sure. That's the thing. There's an Ember template language server, right?
So there's a primitive version. There's a primitive version. So there's the Ember extension for VS Code, which includes like an Ember language server. That already gets you a little bit of the way there. It does some cool stuff, but it's mostly proof of concept of autocomplete. The biggest shortcoming right now is that we use Yak and JSON to generate the parser for the Handlebars grammar, and the mode that we have it in, or the version that we use, doesn't support error correction. So it will not give you an AST if you parse a syntactically invalid template. Now, this is a problem because in autocomplete, what you need is the user types curly curly, and now you need to know, okay, they have started typing curly curly, let us suggest something, but the handlebars parser is like syntax error. What is this? Right. So I think that the newer versions of JSON allow you to generate a error recovery version that can recover from that stuff, but I think someone needs to look into it.
Yeah. And as far as the template linting itself, which is somewhat separate from the autocomplete stuff, like there's a template linter, it'll be part of Ember CLI's default stack, likely in 3.2, I think.
Oh, cool.
I can't remember exactly if it's 3.2 or 3.3.
Yeah.
But it'll I think it's 3.2.
So that shows you right in the editor the errors.
Yes.
What about...
So there's good Vim and Emacs integration, and if anybody's using inferior editors, they probably have good integration too.
What about using Prettier with handlebars?
So there's pain. So Prettier supports HTTPS, and it tries, but it does.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
It does things that I don't want. So
isn't the point of Prettier that you don't get opinions?
No, I mean someone has to pick. No, it splits it up in a way that is bizarre. I think
the
that
HTTPS
most folks
parser part.
The way they're basically like reformatting HTML, right?
Yeah.
And the way the decision, the way they did it, there's issues, there's bugs. We should just look at it. The thing at one point someone proposed using the handlebars parser and essentially rewriting it with the pretty printer that's built into Glimmer VM.
It seems like a great community project.
Yeah, I would love to help.
So I think that there are so in the template linter, the template project, Ember template lint that I wrote. I started, I guess. I'm not the only one writing it. We have rules around block indentation, attribute indentation, and stuff. And it's always been our plan to support rewriting, similar to like you might do ESLint-fix. You would have conceptually similar.
Yeah.
I personally don't have a dog in the hunt to whether it's literally Prettier that does it, but I totally want to. I feel very empowered in almost all of my JavaScript projects where I control and I can actually add it. I love the fact that I can write single quotes, double quotes, backticks, whatever I want, forget a semicolon here or there, and just like run autocorrect and it just like Prettier fixes it all.
I feel like Prettier.
So you've done that before with Ember apps?
What?
With JavaScript?
Prettier?
Yeah.
With the JavaScript.
But not with the template.
Yeah.
I feel like Prettier as a name was strategically a mistake because someone just come along with Prettiest and just destroy it.
No, but Prettier makes it prettier than the prettiest.
No, that's not how superlatives work.
I don't know the language.
I think being able to install Ember Prettier and having it work would be really cool.
Well, I don't think you need an Ember specific thing.
Yeah, why do you need Ember specific thing?
So I actually proposed a while back adding Prettier to the default Ember CLI stack, and I got a non-trivial amount of pushback. And I just need to write the RFC for it. But the basic gist is there's things that Prettier does that don't feel ergonomic to everyone, right?
You mean some of the opinions?
Yeah. Someone like, well, it takes this array, and if it's a multi-line array, it makes it a one-liner if it's less than X characters.
Honestly, it's
whatever the rules are. I'm not terribly interested in arguing about the rules, but that's the point, right?
Yeah.
It is very much in the Ember sort of philosophy to like have a convention and follow it. And it's not always going to be exactly what you would have written, but the fact that you don't have to think about it every single time is a massive win over time.
I mean, no.
Every time someone comments on a pull request, make a new line, add a semicolon, do wrap this in parentheses. I don't understand this tilde in front of the index of because who understands that crap? Anyways, all of that stuff, it should totally be, you're wasting everyone's time.
Agreed.
Every time. Anyways, so we need to do it. Actually adding it to an Ember app is super simple now. And the latest version of Ember CLI, I think back to 2.18 or 2.17, we moved the ESLint config to a single top level ESLint RC. And ESLint added, in ESLint, I want to say 3.1 or 4.1, I wish I could remember, but whatever the recent-ish ones are, they added this overrides support.
Okay.
So you can instead of before you would sprinkle ESLint.rc files throughout your file system or add like ESLint to env node or ESLint to whatever throughout the file in comments. You can just put it in the top level file and you can describe the whole system. I really dig that, and it works. That system works really well with Prettier integration. There's a number of add-ons where I've already added Prettier. I think engines, for example, and Ember test helpers, like all of it. If I have to work in a code base that's it's like more than 10 or 15 lines in a file, I want Prettier.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay, well, I haven't been using it, so yeah.
Ember itself uses Prettier as well. As of a couple of weeks ago, I took over the diff. I ran Prettier around the whole code base.
And you got like 1,000, 1,000,000.
Just YOLO merged it?
I mean, it passed. It passed the test. I can just wait till someone discovers it and is going to, or someone on the core team that we know and love is going to argue with me about specific individual rules of Prettier. I'm like, nope. No, sorry. It's Prettier.
It's Prettier. I mean, that's what the argument is, right? It's Prettier.
The default setting for Prettier, I thought it was no semicolon.
I did semi-true, single quotes.
Okay, so the default is no semicolons for Prettier?
No, I think they had semicolons. They use double quotes and they do trailing commas on functions, which is a new syntax thing for JS, but not. It actually had that particular thing had parsing errors because we didn't have the Babel plugin for it. They want to leave trailing commas in like a function invocation, which is a new syntax in like a stage 1 or 2. I think I don't know.
Even if we don't
email me.
Trailing commas and functions.
Yeah. So you have a trailing comma in an array, right? You know what that is. Yes. Right? So like when you invoke a function. If you have multi-line function invocation, you just leave.
It's offensive to your sensibility.
These kids, just as I'm starting to come around, like, okay, maybe it's fine to not have semicolons at the end. Like, maybe I can live with it. Now you're giving me this crap.
That's tough. That's a lot.
No, I love that. You don't like trailing commas?
These kids.
Okay.
They're too old for this.
Even if we weren't as a community, Ember community, go down what Prettier sets out as the kind of de facto standard. Having an Ember, like I know Ember has ESLint rules, and just having us all buy into something at that level.
Yeah.
So, but the parsing at the handlebars level that's
a separate issue. Yeah, that's the thing we have to fix. We have to fix in handlebars itself. So we Glimmer VM directly uses the handlebars parser, and to get the error correction at that level, we'd have to do it there, or rewrite the parser, right? Which is I know it sounds flippant, but it's actually a possible alternative.
Interesting. All right. Well, thanks y'all so much for being on the show. And
do you guys have anything you want to plug? Are you hiring?
We are hiring very good developers. If you're good and you're excited about working with Ember, we have a ton of positions open, and we would love to talk to you. So connect with me on my professional network. It's linkedin.com/TomMotherEffindale. That's real.
No, it is not.
That is real. And I have
look this shit up.
Been told off.
Calling your bluff right now, buddy.
Hand to God, my friend. LinkedIn.com/
How do you spell effin?
EFFIN. There's no G. LinkedIn.com. So connect with me on my professional network. Send me a message, and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. We do some really cool stuff.
Do you get one of these if you work at LinkedIn?
I will personally buy you one if you get hired. But otherwise, you do get cool swag, but not that one. Unless you go to EmberConf, then you get it. And we did send like 40 people.
We sent a bunch of folks, yeah. That was great.
RWJ Blue on Twitter.
Yep, that's me, but I don't tweet, so don't follow me.
Where should people follow you?
Discuss.emberjs.com. It is the online EmberJS discussion
forum. All right. We're cutting you off.
Yeah, I think I've been very, very happy with rise in activity on the forum.
Yeah,
and I think that's a great place. I've quite enjoyed hanging out there and watching stuff. There's some great discussion, like brand design discussion, and there's a great there's been a couple of
Didn't Dave start that?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay,
there you go.
Yeah, where to hit the nail on the head there, Tom. But there's been a couple of other really good discussions around specific. What about the run loop here, or what's it doing here, that kind of stuff. And I think that's great. And
People take the time to compose something and distill it down, whereas you come back from lunch and you want to read Slack and you're not going to because it's just a stream of consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and also like the Slack has no history.
Right.
Like I find myself commonly answering the same things repeatedly. And I'm sure others are in the same boat.
You and Ed have both been great in that forum too.
I love it. And
that's great.
So I have generally speaking, I have an email-based workflow for notifications in general, and the discourse, the software that we use for the forum, also an EmberMap, by the way, does a wonderful job of emailing notifications. You can get digests.
You can even reply in the email. I noticed that for the first time with the branding thing, because I had never done that, and it was really neat. I was like actually catching up on it. When I was waiting for the subway.
I dig it. And it's nicely formatted. It's not like sometimes you like do the reply thing and that includes like all of your like signature. And the thing you're replying to again in the message, like all your
custom images from the bulletin board.
Yeah. I mean, so I've really been enjoying that. And it's a lot of fun. I've gotten to the point where if folks ask questions that I have either answered before or I think I might answer again, I'm like, if you post a question on Discourse, I will answer it. I will not, I'm not gonna, it's great.
Yep.
And I think, we were talking the other night, I think, Stack Overflow is also a good place for the Q&A sort of thing. I personally don't hang out on Stack Overflow, but, I think it's great for the Q&A style stuff too. But,
right.
I think, I've been really, really excited to see as a community to move the less ephemeral sort of Q&A stuff out of Slack and into, somewhere where you can actually search for it, or you can actually see it tomorrow, or I can let you do the thing.
Right.
I think it's great. I've been really happy.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, and thanks to our listeners, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.